Today's guest is Marcus de Sautoy. A successful mathematician based at Oxford, Marcus is more widely known for his public communication, BBC TV shows, an assortment of books, and in more recent times even music and theatre. I met Marcus at his home shortly after he'd popped some bread in the oven. Am I going to have your undivided attention, or is your brain really on the sourdough bread baking in the oven?
No. The bread is quite good at looking after itself, so I won't be going
All right.
suddenly saying bread, dough, power, sour.
The most important question is, how do I pronounce your surname, and where does it come from? Because to me, it's quite an exotic name, but you seem very English to me.
Yeah, it has origins in France. And funnily enough, I used to apologise for how I pronounce it, because we pronounce it de Sautoy. And I thought that must have been anglicised, because when I go to France, they say, Monsieur de Sautoy. And then a professor in Oxford of French said, oh, but when did your family actually come to England? And I said, well, 1745, because actually it was a Catholic family helping the Scots fight the English. So they came over with Bonnie Prince Charlie to Scotland, and then this Pierre-François de Sautoy got caught and was made a prisoner of war in Basingstoke. Too many roundabouts and he couldn't find his way out. But he explained, well, the French Revolution, they changed so many things. They tried to change the names of the days of the week, the weights and measures, time, and they actually changed pronunciation. So people want to know French is for the king, le roi, but actually it used to be le roi. And you could tell whether somebody was a revolutionary or not if they said le roi, they were ancien régime, or le roi, and they were a revolutionary. So du Sautoy, before the French Revolution, was du Sautoy. So actually, I now do not apologise for the way I pronounce my name. It is actually an old French pronunciation.
And give me a de Sautoy.
De Sautoy.
De Sautoy. I mean, that's so long ago. Do you sort of identify with any kind of French heritageness, or is it just a quirk of history now? Or do you feel something about it?
Well, weirdly, we're sitting in my office at home making this recording, and next to me I have a portrait of Pierre-François de Sautoy. So it's very interesting. There's kind of mathematical element to this, because, of course, every generation, you've sort of got 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. And so, that one name, de Sautoy, comes from a very sort of singular branch of this huge tree. Yet, because of this name and it being taken down, I do strangely picked up on something. I have a sort of feeling of connection to this one person, but why him as opposed to, the many other powers of 2 people that I've descended from? But I think, it's quite a kind of romantic story. He was caught, made a prisoner of war, stayed here. He probably avoided having his head chopped off. There are no de Sautoys in France anymore, just as kind of band of us in the UK. Weirdly, if you Google de Sautoy, you'll get a lot of maths, but you'll also get some Bond movies. Not that I've been in a Bond movie,
no.
But one of our other relatives, Carmen de Sautoy, was an actress with the RSC, and she actually appeared as a Bond girl in one of the Bond movies. So you'll also see some pictures of her as a Bond girl.
Oh, wow. There you go. I have Googled you. I haven't Googled deep enough. I have not come across that yet. Have you gone back to France and found some hall or cottage that they were from or something? Or?
Well, I'm really hoping for a chateau rather than a cottage, because I'm really hoping for the reinstatement of the monarchy in France, and then I'll be able to reclaim this chateau, because they were quite an aristocratic family, which is why they probably got wiped out during the revolution. So, but I'm not holding my breath on that one.
All right, well, let's go to your childhood then. Like, after all this sort of highfalutin aristocracy and whatnot, what was your childhood like? Where were you born? Where are you from?
Well, I was born in London, but we moved out within a couple of years to Oxfordshire. And so I really grew up, not too far away from where I now, work, which is the University of Oxford. And that's probably significant because I spent a lot of my time doing music, for example. That was one of my big passions. And I would go up to Oxford a lot, play in the Oxford Youth Orchestra. And so I've always sort of had a connection to Oxford through my music. And I think seeing all the students there and how much fun they were having, I think that sort of helped kind of set my sites on. I think that looks a really fun place to hang out and be a student and to think. But I just went to normal comprehensive school in my town, so kind of nothing fancy there. But that said, I had fantastic teachers, and I do credit one teacher in particular, Mr. Baleson, who sort of picked me out at the end of a class, and I thought I was in trouble. But then he sort of took me around the back of the maths blog, and I thought, I'm really in trouble now. But then he said, well, I think you should find out what maths is really about. And he recommended a few books to me. One was called The Language of Mathematics. And that was really intriguing because at the time I was really interested in learning languages. I thought that's what I wanted to do, was because my mum had been in the Foreign Office, and I sort of thought that was kind of a fun. Actually, I thought she was a spy, frankly. She gave us this image that she was basically 008 or something.
Do you know for sure that she wasn't?
Well, no, exactly. Of course, that's a fantastic cover. But I was finding languages really frustrating because there were so many irregular verbs. There's a lot of learning you had to do. I really didn't have a very good memory. And so that's why I think mathematics particularly appealed to me, because you can reconstruct things from first principles, and I love that. Everything made logical sense, so you didn't have to just remember things. And then this book, and I still have it, it's up on my shelf here, the one we bought after my teacher recommended it. It revealed, the power of mathematics as a language to describe the universe, and that's when I started to...
Maths wasn't your passion at this point, but you were obviously good at it because Mr. Baleson had seen this. Or...
Well, that was what was interesting. I actually had a chance to... I did a radio programme for BBC Radio 4, which is called Top of the Class, and it's a chance for you to go back to your old school and spend some time with a teacher. You choose a teacher that inspired you. And I asked him at the time, why did you pick me out? I mean, did you do this sort of on a regular basis? Just if I throw a dart enough times, one will hit the bullseye. And he said, no, I didn't do it with anybody else. So I said, why did you pick me? Because it wasn't that particularly fantastic at that point. And he said, I could see you were responding to abstract thought. And I just knew this would be a wonderful place for you to spend your life. And so right he was. I mean, I just love this the imaginative side of being a mathematician. And that's what's interesting as well, because one of the other books he recommended, and has been very important throughout my whole life, has been A Mathematician's Apology by G.H. Hardy. And in that book, he describes what it's like to be a mathematician. And he continually compares it to a creative artist rather than being a kind of useful scientist. And through my time at school, what I loved doing was playing music, being artistic. I loved doing theatre. These were my passions. But I still wanted something which was kind of scientific in nature, which was exact, precise. I think I was quite an insecure teenager, and I think I liked the security of mathematics. It's one thing, I've done quite a lot of work on Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. I did some work with the theatre production version of it, and Mark Haddon and I have done events together. And I think it's very clever that Mark Haddon, it's about a kid with Asperger's. But why does he love mathematics in that book? Because he just enjoys the security of knowing that something's going to happen a particular way and it will happen the same way again, whilst people are very unpredictable. And so there's a security that mathematics provides. And I think that also appealed to me. But I think this book, A Mathematician's Apology, back to that, it showed me that mathematics was the perfect bridge between the creative world of the arts, where you can use your imagination, make worlds that don't exist but are consistent and weird things happen in them, but still being a world of science as well.
How gradual or violent a process was Mr. Baleson's intervention from this dream of that seemed to involve language and music to becoming a mathematician? Was it overnight, or was it a gradual drift?
I think as soon as a teacher takes interest in you and sort of gives you that sort of positive feeling, you want to respond to that. So I think that was a very key moment. And I wouldn't say it was overnight, but gradually as I learnt more. And another really important thing that I feel was very lucky in my trajectory was that at school we did something called SMP Mathematics, School Mathematics Project it was called. And this was an educational kind of experiment, which in retrospect probably failed because many people got completely lost in it. But the idea was, let's show our students at school real mathematics. So this course showed us the ideas of topology. It showed us the axioms of group theory. It showed us set theory. And that just really excited me. And I think I was lucky to have a teacher who understood the mathematics. And I've taught retrospectively with a lot of teachers who taught that course. And they said, well, it was a great course. But the trouble was that most of the maths teachers, they didn't have a maths degree. They didn't understand it themselves. And so it sort of basically failed because it's very deep ideas, needs somebody with a lot of depth in the understanding to be able to teach it.
So many people I've spoken to on this podcast actually have talked about when they got to university, mathematics was completely different to what they expected. But it sounds like for you it wasn't. You had been
I had completely the opposite. And in fact, it had a slightly bad effect because the first year, they were teaching us all these things, axioms of group theory, topology. And I said, I've seen all of this already. And actually, I spent far too much time doing theatre and music and slightly flunked my first year because I thought, I know everything that's in the lectures. We've already done this at school. I realised you still have to do some hard work to learn this stuff. But yeah, you're right. Actually, I think I was lucky to see some real maths. And you know what? I feel that's one of my missions as a kind of communicator of the excitement of mathematics. That I really want to try and show people the real mathematics, the big stories. And I think that's what I responded to. Rather than all the just grammar and kind of the scales and arpeggios, play some real music. I was lucky that my teacher and my course at school played some real mathematics to me. And I heard the Beethoven, I heard the Mozart. I didn't just have to play scales all the time. And I think that's what we're missing. We're not being brave enough.
So when you're at high school and presumably you're applying to do mathematics at university, that you've decided that's your thing, what were you thinking your career was going to be? What did you think you were going to be when you grew up and you finished university as a schoolboy?
A mathematician. I really already had identified that I wanted to spend my life telling stories in this language. I had a few role models. One of them was Christopher Zeman. He'd done the Christmas lectures in 1978, and I was very lucky that my dad managed to get me a ticket to one of the lectures and we'd watch the rest on telly. It was the first time Christmas lectures had been started by Faraday in 1825. It was the first time they'd ever risked doing it on maths, because what on earth are you going to show people? You can't blow things up.
So for people in America, for example, these Christmas lectures run by the Royal Institution is this sort of once a year real national profile showcase of a science, and some famous scientist does like a grand lecture that gets shown on TV and everything. And
that's right. And it's a kind of series of lectures, 5 lectures. They're broadcast on television at Christmas. Amazing kind of exposure. But this was the first time they'd ever been done on maths. And Christopher Zeman is one of our greatest, he's now died now, but he was one of our greatest mathematicians. He solved one version of the Poincare conjecture for, I think, dimension 6. And so this was a real practicing mathematician who spent his time that Christmas talking to kids. And I thought, I said, I want to be him when I grow up. That's amazing. He seems to be really enjoying.
You did become him when you grew up.
Weirdly, I did, because I actually got invited in 2006 to give these lectures myself. And I ended the lectures saying to the kids sitting there, you know what? I was like you, sitting in the audience in 1978. And here I am up here, living my dream, doing mathematics, telling people these mathematical stories. And I hope that one day one of you will be up here saying, I went to the lectures that Marcus de Sautoy did in 2006.
Did you find like a screenshot or a still of you in the audience in the Zeman lecture? You've never found one?
I've never found one.
No.
And hopefully nobody else will, because I was a horribly spotty teenager at that stage.
You said that at high school you already knew you wanted to be a mathematician. Did you properly know what the mathematician was? Like, if you went back and spoke to that boy now, would it be a bit naive, his perception, or do you think you pretty much had it nailed?
No, I think, you see, that book, A Mathematician's Apology, really is a fantastic description of I mean, a lot of people criticize that book, and I've been very critical. Its opening really puts anyone off trying to communicate maths to the general public, because it says, he writes, it is a melancholy experience for a professional mathematician to find himself writing about mathematics. The job of a mathematician is to prove theorems, not to talk about them. So he's basically saying nobody should try and do what I'm doing. But I think it was a very good description, and I think that it gave me a very good idea about what it was I wanted to do. And it's interesting because at sixth form, I went to, so my school didn't have a sixth form, so we all went to a sixth form college, which fed the comprehensives in the area into it. So it was like a massive school, about 800 17 and 18-year-olds. It was amazing. It was almost like a transition to university. But I remember my maths teacher there saying, maths rather difficult, pretty difficult to get into Oxford. Why don't you do engineering? You probably get in, there's much better opportunities for jobs. And I said, that I do not want to be an engineer. It's really, I don't want to get my hands dirty in kind of messy stuff. I love just the purity of this subject, and I was already tending very much towards kind of the more abstract end, what one would call maybe pure mathematics.
That sounds quite grown up, quite a mature attitude for someone of that age, to not be thinking, oh, I want to drive a Ferrari or play for Arsenal or something. I want to I want to do these esoteric things and prove
I was
things.
an incredibly nerdy kid at school, and I loved sort of the idea of not doing things in the normal way. Whilst all my mates were, getting into punk rock, I was getting into Wagner. And, I loved going to 6-hour Wagner operas in Oxford at the theatre there. So, it's now that I'm sort of living my teen. I go with my kids to Glastonbury, and but that was not me as a kid.
What was you went to Oxford University, did you, as an undergraduate?
Yeah.
What was that like then? You said the first year was... You didn't do that well your first year, you said.
Well, I have a lot of other interests other than just mathematics, which, help me do my mathematics, actually, because you can't do maths all the time and you need the sort of downtime. So doing the music, doing the theatre actually often helps my mathematics. So it was wonderful just being in an environment where so many theatre productions, so many orchestras playing, and so I spent a lot of time with that. I was very lucky to go to Wadham College, which had a lot of other state school. So, people's impressions of Oxford is rather a kind of posh, stuffy place, but actually there's people from all spectrums of life. And I actually was lucky to be in a college which was very much people like me who came from state schools. And it was a very political time. It was 1980s. There was a lot of reaction to Margaret Thatcher here. So I got very mixed up in sort of left-wing politics and stuff. But it was a joy because, we were doing fantastically exciting mathematics, especially towards the end of the course, but also just, it's where I kind of cut my teeth doing other things as well.
So it sounds like, there was lots of distractions for you, but you did quite well as an undergraduate, didn't you? Like you kind of got back on track. And
I got back on track, and it was, I realised, actually, my dream is to become a mathematician. I need to do my doctorate. If I'm going to get to that place, I need to do really well in my finals. So at some point, I just gave up everything and just burned hard on mathematics and did well enough to get my grant to do a doctorate. And that's actually when mathematics really started. Because even up to that point, you're still really learning the scales and arpeggios, even at university. I think we only started to seeing real mathematics almost in my last year a little bit. But it's that transition, and it's a massive transition from undergraduate mathematics to graduate mathematics. Suddenly the problems aren't solvable in an hour with the material that you've been given. Every problem up to that point is manageable. And suddenly your supervisor's saying, read this, read that. They're totally I didn't understand any of these papers I was given. I had to learn to read in a different way, not step by step, which is, kind of school and university mathematics. It was about getting an overall impression of what is this paper talking about, and then going into the details when needed. I learned a completely different way of reading mathematics. And then again, dealing with the uncertainty of your supervisor giving you a problem that they don't know how to answer, and it may not even have a recognizable, navigable answer. That, as a mathematician supervising other PhDs, I spend a lot of my time actually as a psychologist, not a mathematician, dealing with the uncertainty of going into the unknown. That is very, very unsettling and a real transitionary stage. But that's when I really started to buzz, because suddenly I was reading real mathematics for the first time. In that first year, I did my own first contribution to mathematics, and that was just such a buzz to realize, oh my gosh, nobody has ever thought this before, and it's now something that with my proof will be there forever. And that is one of the just joys of mathematics. The other sciences are very evolutionary in nature. A theory will survive for a bit, but then new insights will mean it falls away. Mathematics has a robustness about it because of proof. So I know that the things that I've proved will last till the end of time. And in fact, G.H. Hardy talks about that in The Mathematician's Apology. He says immortality is probably a bit of a fancy word, but mathematicians probably have the best chance of achieving it.
You make me want to be a mathematician. So YouTube videos don't quite have that permanence, I don't think. But obviously, towards the end of your undergraduate and then starting as a graduate, you have to specialize in a subject. Can you give me just a very, very brief outline of what you specialized in? And more importantly, why you specialized in that, of all things?
Yeah, so it goes back to something I learned at school, which was, I'm actually a group theorist. So this is a language that was developed, first of all, by this rather romantic historical figure, Évariste Galois, killed in a duel at the age of 20 over love and revolutionary politics in France at the beginning of the 19th century. Yet already he developed this language, which became group theory. And this is the language I write on my yellow notepads, which my office here is kind of piled with them. So this is trying to understand symmetry and what symmetries are possible. So the ancient Greeks, for example, prove that the Platonic solids, there are 5 of them. You can't make a 6th one. These are the shapes that make good dice. But I'm looking at sort of symmetries in like higher dimensions, what dice are possible in higher dimensional spaces. My other passion is number theory. So I find that by combining very different ways of looking at things, you can make extraordinary progress. So I actually use a tool which is used for trying to understand prime numbers, something called a zeta function. This is trying to understand these wild numbers, the primes, which we don't understand any patterns to them. But I'm using the same tool, but to look at what symmetries might be possible, and using that kind of set of glasses from number theory to look at a completely different area in group theory. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, that seed that was sown at school may be the reason that I ended up doing that.
Do you think you just have an innate interest in that subject, or did you have a particularly inspirational lecturer who drew you into it again? Or
you know what? I think it comes back again to that passion for languages, because I think mathematicians divide into 2 types. The ones that view mathematics very pictorially, and they're very good at just drawing diagrams or pictures. Roger Penray is my colleague in Oxford. Twistor theory comes out of his just ability to kind of crystallize in diagrammatic form complex thought. Whilst I'm somebody who likes to change things into language, so I'm very linguistic in the way I do my maths, and I follow the rules of that language to make insights about something which doesn't sound linguistic at all. Symmetry is about geometry, isn't it? Isn't it about pictures, about patterns? But this was the great power that this language had. It threw away those, and so you don't get distracted by what the thing looks like, and you can understand its structure and make things in dimensions that you can't even see. So I think, why I felt happy in this world was, I think, partly because I love manipulating language and seeing what the consequences of that are.
You did a PhD, obviously.
We call it a DPhil, interestingly, in Oxford. So we're sort of unique in that, and we're a bit nerdy about saying, I didn't do a PhD, I have a DPhil.
Okay, you did a DPhil. Doing this seems like a traumatic experience for many people I speak to, and there's this time in the middle where everything falls away from under you and you think you're not doing it right. And was it a traumatic process for you, or was it smooth sailing?
No, not smooth sailing at all. And in a way, I think that's important. One of my favorite films is Good Will Hunting. Matt Damon, a janitor in a maths department. There are these problems up on the blackboard, and he just solves them really easily, and professors come in next morning and go, oh my God. And I think, ultimately he doesn't become a mathematician in that film because the maths is too easy. It's no challenge. For him, it's the women, the challenge. He doesn't understand them at all. There's no algorithm. So for me, I think, it's important that things are difficult and you have that really tough time. And I did. But then there's something very exciting about maths where you can get a sudden surge of insight and understanding, and things can happen very quickly. And that happened to me. I find train journeys very conducive to mathematics. And indeed, my great insight happened on a train journey, not a very romantic one. It was back from London to Oxford. But I think there's something about the way the landscape is going past you. It sort of creates something, the speed of it, just right for stimulating mathematics. And so I kind of had this just like, oh my gosh, I think I see how to do this thing. And then it turned out to be a good breakthrough in this area. It got published in the top journal, the Annals of Mathematics, where Andrew Wiles published Fermat's Last Theorem. It's our dream, that journal. So my doctorate was published there, and that really launched me.
You remember that train journey very well, obviously.
Yeah, I think, I've got a few moments in my life of those moments of just extraordinary insight, and you live off those, because most of the time you're wrestling and you're having a really hard time and nothing's working, and so you hold on to those euphoric moments.
Did you keep the ticket?
I didn't keep the ticket, no.
Wouldn't that be great?
Gosh.
Have that framed on the wall. Do you find yourself now, if you're stuck on something mathematical, booking some unnecessary train journey in the hope of rattling something loose?
Yes, it's. I certainly value those kind of spaces where you can kind of let yourself just. It's funny because I don't find. Some people find plane journeys quite good because it's kind of a space of 13 hours if they're going over to California or something from London. But I'm afraid I just use those to watch movies that I haven't watched for a while. So it's train journeys are the ones for me.
Today's episode has been supported by G Research, a leading quantitative finance research firm based in Europe. They're always looking to hire the brightest people to help tackle the big questions in the world of finance. It's a chance to work with some of the very best in machine learning, big data, and some of the most advanced technology used to predict movements in financial markets. Maybe you are the sort of person they're looking for. To learn more about what opportunities are available and the great flexible work environment they're offering, head to gresearch.co.uk/Numberphile. There's a link in the notes. G Research, create today, predict tomorrow.
Well, I think there's an important thing to learn here, because I had, this great theorem that I proved. It was in the annals, and I had to learn to deal with the downtime again. And I remember I spent a period of time in Israel at the Hebrew University, and things weren't going really well, and there was a lot of eyes on me at that point.
Because you'd had this good...
What's he going to do next? And I think there's something rather nice about being a PhD student, DPhil student, is nobody's looking at you yet, and so it's quite. And I always say, enjoy this period to my PhD students. It's space for you to experiment, play, and nobody's watching too much. But one of my professors I work with at the Hebrew University said, you've got to learn this, that it's like a sine wave. But and unless you've actually experienced a sine wave actually oscillate, you think, oh my gosh, there's a peak and then I'm down again, and maybe it just stays down here and I'm done. So it's really important to learn that there was going to be another up. And once that happened, it helps me now to always think, okay, it's a sine wave. It's not a parabola where it's sort of just one height.
Yeah.
So my journey was kind of like I had a postdoc somewhere in Oxford, then I spent some time at Hebrew University. Very important for me because that's where I met my wife. So I got a very strong connection to the Hebrew University. I spent some time in Cambridge, where I did a lot of number theory with Professor Coates in Cambridge, and then I came back to Oxford doing my mathematics. But already, sort of early on, I had this wonderful thing from the Royal Society. It was called a University Research Fellowship, and it was kind of like a postdoc. And most people would be going into a lectureship, and the teaching starts to overwhelm you. This was a period about 10 years when I could carry on doing my research, and it made some major breakthroughs during that time. But one of the things that was really important was the Royal Society were encouraging us to actually not just do our research. They didn't want us teaching because it was meant to be time out. But when I wrote an article for the Times newspaper, actually about the Fields Medals, it was before Matt Damon made Fields Medals famous because they talk about them in Good Will Hunting. And I wanted to write an article just to tell people about my excitement about mathematics. Partly starting to think about that Christopher Zeman who'd made the effort to talk to people. And I was worried what my community would think if I wrote this article. And it spent ages, it was 1,000 words. It took me a month to write it. It was just painful. I'm not a natural writer. And, that sentence I quoted at the beginning of Mathematician's Apology, basically we were living under the spectre of G.H. Hardy saying, do not talk about mathematics, just do it. So I was really nervous that people would think I'm selling out or...
being a bit showy or
being a bit showy or maybe got nothing else to say mathematically, so he's talking about maths, But then I got this incredible feedback from the Royal Society. They looked after their research fellows and would come and visit me in Cambridge, make sure everything was all right. They said, that article you wrote in the Times? We think that's a really great idea because we think it's really important that scientists talk to society about the importance of their work and don't just stay in the ivory tower. And that support from, our scientific body, going back to Newton, was really important in thinking, okay, yeah, I think this is an important part of being an academic, being a scientist, being a mathematician, is actually telling people about why we're doing things, why it will be important, what impact it will have. And so that started me on this extra part of my career, which has now become very important. Partly why I'm now probably talking to you is that I realized that making mathematical discoveries is important, but talking about them and telling other people is when they start to come alive. We do that in our seminars, in our journals, but actually if we do it more broadly, people will realize why maths is so important.
Some people, particularly people outside the UK, might not know this about Marcus, but he's known to most people for being like, a real face of mathematics. You're on lots of BBC TV shows and the radio. So, you're very omnipresent when it comes to mathematics and communicating mathematics. You're a real sort of champion of it. But that thing you were worried about when you were writing that Times article, that kind of snipiness or jealousy and that, was that well-founded? Do you still find that? Do you think people think, oh, Marcus de Sautoy is he's a TV guy, he's not a real mathematician? Or do you think people have kind of accepted you can be both?
I was really encouraged by the feedback I got from my fellow mathematicians, and a lot of them said, oh, it's so important what you're doing. And, as time has gone on, I get so many people telling me, we have these things in England when you're applying to university, you had to write a personal statement about why you want to do mathematics. And they said time and again, people just write that they've read Music of the Primes and got so excited about the unsolved problem of prime numbers, the first sort of major book that I wrote. And that's, and I get that from PhD students and say, the reason I'm here, one of my PhD students, he's now graduated, but he came and knocked on my door and said, I came to a talk you gave in New Zealand when I was at school, and my dream was to come and work with you. And here I am. I'm now done a degree. He's a Korean guy, now done a degree in Oxford, and I want to be your PhD student. And that's so exciting. And so the feedback's been, incredibly positive.
Do you feel a pressure to keep doing math research and publishing to keep like your street cred?
I don't feel a pressure. I actually love doing it. I mean, it's hard juggling all of these things, but weirdly, we've just been through hopefully coming towards the end of a coronavirus and lockdowns and things. That's given me space to actually revisit a couple of mathematical problems I've been working on and really made progress with them. And because it's tough doing mathematics, you have to kind of get into this rather Buddhist state of meditation, not letting things crowd in. And so lockdown for me has been wonderful in sort of re-exploring some challenges that I'd kind of left sort of bubbling. So yeah, I think, why am I communicating about mathematics? Because I love doing mathematics. So it's really important to me to carry on doing the thing I love doing alongside telling people why it's such an important subject.
You talked about the Fields Medal before, which is famously given to young mathematicians. You have to be below 40, don't you, to receive it?
That's correct.
And you also talked about how you hit a couple of home runs really early on. Your DPhil was published in the Annals of Mathematics. Have you still got it now? Do you think you're as good at mathematics now as you were when you were a younger man?
I think there is something about youth which is helpful, and that's a certain sort of ignorance and arrogance. I often compare it, one of my favourite Wagner operas is Siegfried, and in Siegfried he's able to kill the dragon Fafner because he doesn't know fear. And I think one of the troubles is that we begin to learn fear of big problems like the Riemann hypothesis about prime numbers. And that can sometimes play us out of the game. We don't take the risks that a young person might do because they don't know that they shouldn't be trying that or something.
What is the risk? You mean the waste of time? Or what are you risking by taking on a big dragon?
Sort of waste of time, I think. That, if everyone else has tried this, what new am I bringing to this? But sometimes it's still things that we haven't tried. But mathematics has become very rich and complex that experience can actually be a helpful component. So, knowing about a lot of other areas that you can bring those insights to a problem is actually means that having a bit of mathematical maturity, I think it is still very helpful. There's a weird thing about having to just dedicate yourself to something which many people think, well, why are you spending all your life doing that? It seems to be only about 10 people in the world that really understand what you're doing. So sometimes as you grow older, just the indulgence of doing mathematics can be quite hard to deal with, actually. So I think dealing with that, I think, it is something a lot of people face. There's a kind of slightly, I talked a little bit about Asperger's and before, and I think that having that incredible focus and not really being interested in anything else is an extremely helpful trait for a mathematician. And in fact, Simon Baron-Cohen, who's one of the experts in autism and Asperger's, he did a piece of research recently looking at the correlation between very high mathematical ability, looking at those mathematicians who won prizes and just seeing, where they are on the autistic spectrum and seeing whether is that a superpower. We've heard talk of that being I think it is a really helpful superpower for a mathematician.
I imagine you also can have a bit less of that when you have to worry about sourdough bread and kids and all the different things that come with older age.
A lot of my PhD students say, I have a lot of respect for you now having suddenly started my life and trying to keep doing mathematics with all of the noise outside. And I think being able to shut out the noise from all of the demands from your faculty, from your family, and that's it can be very annoying sometimes for your colleagues and your family if you do that, but it's really important.
As you said, there's a bunch of yellow notepads around us at the moment. You said you've been getting back into a bit of mathematics just lately, and I saw them strewn around your leather chair here. Are you tackling dragons at the moment, or are you dealing with smaller things?
I think it's really important to go for smaller things, because often the dragons, you find the back way into attacking them not from head on. So I think anyone who solves the Riemann hypothesis will probably not have been working on the Riemann hypothesis. I bet they will be working on something that seemed unrelated, and then suddenly they see a connection and they go, oh my gosh, this is the way forward. So I think it's really important. At the moment, I'm just working on a very small example of something, but I know that if I understand this one little example, it will give me the insight into the whole theory. So I picked an example which is rich enough to have the complexity, but is still manageable, that I can actually kind of write out the equations on my yellow notepads. So I think that's a strategy that I give my PhD students. Don't try and go for the big one in a first go. Just go for the example of it and see whether that has enough of the kind of richness that you see what's going on in general.
One last thing about doing mathematics. How do you do mathematics? I always hear people like you say, I'm going to sit down today and do maths. Like, what does that look like? I bet not being a mathematician, it's one of the hardest things for me to understand. You sit down with a blank piece of paper and just start writing things and then adding things together? Or what does doing maths look like?
Well, I think that was one of the motivations for the second book I wrote, which is Finding Moonshine, or in America it's called Symmetry, just simply. And it is the story of symmetry, but that's what my research is about, trying to understand symmetry. It's the story from the first objects that people made, these dice, through to classification of finite simple groups today and the things we're still doing. I kept a diary for 12 months when I wrote that book, which was my attempt to answer this question. My parents would ask me that, my girlfriends.
What are you doing all day?
What are you doing all day? And it is a slightly mysterious thing. So I kept that diary to sort of examine my own process about how I do things. And actually, if you open the book, then the yellow notepads are the flyleaf in the hardcover book. But I think there's a lot of playing going on. That's why, people who play are good at mathematics, because you just need to try things out, try different avenues, and to keep on questioning things. And that's really being able to ask good questions is almost more important than being able to come up with slick answers.
Now, a huge part of your job, and it is part of your job description, is public understanding of mathematics and outreach and doing slightly more out there things. You've written books and done TV shows, and we'll link to all sorts of that sort of stuff. But a thing I do want to talk to you about is theatre and plays, because that is a bit more unusual when it comes to outreach and whatnot. Tell me about what you've been doing in this area, because it's different.
Well, as I said, music and theatre were always very important to me. But actually, in a funny way, they were always places I would escape when my mathematics was not going well. So when I was in Oxford, I worked with a community theatre, the Pegasus Theatre in Oxford. And it would be where I escaped to when the maths wasn't going well. And when it was really going badly during my PhD and postdoc period, I remember I almost fantasized about running away with a theatre company. I downloaded an application form to a theatre school in Paris several times.
In what role? Were you like an actor or like...
I liked different things. So I liked acting. I liked devising pieces. I did some directing as well. But there was a theatre company I met whilst working at that community theatre called Complicité. And they were doing theatre in a completely different way. And it was quite a mathematical way. They would set up kind of theatre exercises, which were essentially little algorithms that they would then let run and see what would emerge from this. And I really love that. You know, they wouldn't come with a script and then you'd learn your lines. Completely the opposite. The script, if it ever emerged, would be right at the end of the process. And they would use this kind of experimenting, using the theatre stage as a kind of like almost a place to play, you know.
Like one of your yellow notebooks.
Exactly. You know, my maths started going well and I went the mathematical route. But just shortly after I published Music of the Primes, which talks about the story of Ramanujan, this Indian mathematician who comes to G.H. Hardy because he's got insights about prime numbers. But then this theatre company contacts me and say, oh, we're doing a play about Ramanujan and Hardy. Would you come in and give us some of your insights about the story and the one that we want to know about the maths? Turned out to be this theatre company that I always loved, Complicite. And they say, we probably don't know who we are. And I wrote back this such fanboy letter.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly. I've been fantasizing about running away with you.
I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah. So I was there tomorrow. And actually, they were quite surprised to find a mathematician who understood the language of theatre. And so I set up all of these theatre games for them to explore the maths that Ramanujan and Hardy.
They must have thinking, oh, we've bitten off more than we can chew with this guy.
Well, exactly. But the weird thing was that the guy who runs the company, Simon McBurney, he would just love this, that there was... and so he said, are you free tomorrow? I said, yes. And I kept on coming back. Eventually, the producer said, when Simon asks you to come back tomorrow, you've got to say no, because he's got to write a play and he's just getting obsessed. You know, he wants to know what a mock theta function is. And this really is a bit too far for him. Anyway, so this reignited my passion for theatre. And out of that piece of work, which became a play called A Disappearing Number, I met another actress who actually had a mathematical and physics background. And we started working together about 10 years ago. We started making this piece. One of my favorite writers is Borges, Argentinian short story writer. And he writes very interesting mathematical, scientific kind of short stories. And one of them, The Library of Babel, is actually an exploration of what the possible shapes of the universe could be. It's actually a story about the Poincare conjecture, weirdly. This kind of inspired me. Oh, I'd love to make a piece of theatre which explored the way a universe might be looped. In a way, the universe for the theatre is the stage. That is your universe. And then you can ask, well, yeah, but what's the rules of this universe? If you exit stage right, what happens? Well, perhaps you enter stage left. And if you go through a trapdoor, perhaps you drop in through the ceiling. And so I thought, oh, this is fun. You can make actually a torus out of this theatre space. And so it sort of began this journey. And then we created a piece with two characters called X. I play X. You know, if we're going to write a play, I better have a part for myself. So I'm X and Victoria Gould played Y. And we used this process of devising to create a piece, which ultimately we did in many places, but it eventually arrived at the Barbican. What an amazing dream for an actor, let alone one who started as a mathematician, to actually perform their play at the Barbican. And it got its name then, which is now, it's called I Is a Strange Loop. And we've just released it on the Maths Institute, Oxford Institute YouTube channel, so you can see it there. But the most exciting thing for me is that we've also published the play. And it's published by Faber. And Faber is, you know, it's where every playwright wants to be. It's where Beckett is published, where Tom Stoppard is published. It's a real dream to have the play sort of crystallized there. So that's been, you know, as you say, rather unusual way to communicate scientific mathematical ideas. But that's been my passion, not just to talk to the people who will come to a science festival or would naturally log on to, a science YouTube channel like Numberphile. You know, great. It's important that we give them great material, but I think the real challenge is getting to people who wouldn't naturally choose Numberphile or a science festival, but might go to the theatre and then suddenly see, oh my gosh, there's mathematics in this. But I didn't realise that was maths, the way a space is connected together. So I'm very excited by using sort of rather unexpected platforms to tell mathematical stories.
Am I being anti-snobby by suggesting are theatre goers the sort of people who are ignorant of mathematics and the importance of academic studies? And it feels like this is like one area where there wouldn't be a desperate call for, come on, we need to get these people educated.
You'd be surprised. And I think it plays to this still two cultures idea of either you're into the arts and the humanities or you're into kind of science. So I think you'll find quite a lot of people who perhaps enjoy the world of the theatre still wearing their I'm rubbish at maths as a badge of honour. And what was very curious is the place that we took this play to, where we got the most extraordinary reception and we found our audience, was India. So we took it to the Mumbai festival and we did a couple of performances there, and it was extraordinary. People on this feet whooping during the performance at seeing mathematics on the stage. And I think there was something interesting here because, there's a mathematical literacy in India because, they value mathematics. You can't wear "I'm useless at maths" as a badge of honor. No parent would allow their kids to say that. Yet they still consider mathematics as something which is in the classroom or in the university. And for them, it was a shock of seeing mathematics in a completely different environment. They were just blown away by it. And I think that is true, that audiences in the UK are more used to seeing sort of ideas of science creeping into the theatre. You think of Copenhagen, Michael Frayn's play exploring Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, or Tom Stoppard and Arcadia exploring chaos theory and fractals. So, we're a little bit more used to seeing science in the theatre. For this Indian audience, they were like totally blown away.
What was it like for you as someone who, for most of your life, when you write a math paper and that, there's probably 100 people in the world who can even understand it, yet alone critique it, to suddenly be putting yourself out there, being reviewed by theatre critics and your writing being criticised by a whole new group of people who don't have to understand mathematics to say you're good or bad at it. What was that like for you?
Well, I always love new challenges. So for me, I'm always looking for something else to challenge myself. So it was frightening, but exciting as well. And I think there's something which actually is a common thread throughout all of this, because even though you might say I'm only talking to 100 people at a conference, that is still a performance. And I think, we're all natural storytellers. We're all natural performers. The audience might be a bit smaller and might be a bit more esoteric of group theorists from around the world. But I didn't feel it was so different to now standing up on the stage at the Barbican in the Pitt Theatre.
But you're on really solid ground when you're giving a talk about group theory, because you're one of the world's best group theorists. When you're acting, you're probably not in the 100 best actors in the world.
No, and I think that I wasn't very nervous about that. And what was really exciting was to get feedback at the end of a performance and people, talking to people and people going, "What? You're actually a professor of maths? I thought you were a professional actor." So that was really reassuring to, I would have taken myself out of the play had it weakened and got somebody else to perform it. It was fun devising it. It starts with some just physical movement by me I do basically ruler and compass construction using my body of a hexagon in space. And that requires some really very important skills of holding a point and moving and making sure the point that you're holding does not move with you. That's sort of the thing that, you learn in Lecoq in this school in France. And so, I have done a lot of theatre, so it's not a completely new world to me. But it was, this wasn't just learning lines. This was a very physical part.
What's next? Are you doing another one?
Well, I am. I've got a real taste for this. So during lockdown, I wrote a new book, which I actually delivered early because my diary got gutted. So I've written this new book called Thinking Better, The Art of the Shortcut. But then I delivered it 2 months early and my editor said, "Oh my gosh, you authors, you've been so productive during lockdown. I've got so many books. It's going to be a couple of months before I get back to you." So I actually spent that time writing a new play. And this play is about one of my heroes in mathematics, André Weil. French mathematician.
French again? You and the French?
Oh, yeah, maybe it's some resonance there going back to... People might know him because he was one of the people who created Bourbaki, this fictional mathematician. If you go into a maths library, you see a lot of books by this guy, Nicolas Bourbaki. You think, wow, that's the most productive guy out. But it turns out he's a fictional mathematician created by this French group to try and write under a pseudonym. So I use him as a kind of chorus figure in this play. But then it's the story, rather extraordinary story of André Weil and his journey. The play starts in prison with André Weil in prison. You think, why is this mathematician in prison? And in fact, in prison, he makes the most extraordinary mathematical discoveries. He proves a version of the Riemann hypothesis, not for primes, but for counting solutions to equations. And so it's sort of the story of the breakthrough that he makes whilst in prison, but also the journey of how he got to prison. And he's very obsessed with India and the Bhagavad Gita, and he makes a trip to India. So I've actually used the Bhagavad Gita, which is a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna, the god, Arjuna is about to go into battle, is very nervous about the deaths that will ensue. But Krishna explains to him his duty is to go into battle. Turns out that André Weil decides not to go into battle, which is why he ends up being in prison, because he's deserted his army, and it's kind of his journey. So I created this new character, which is his cellmate, who is kind of Krishna to his Arjuna. And it's just a play on paper at the moment. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going into a studio working with 4 actors to take this from page to stage. And if that goes well and it's working as a piece, we're going to pitch it to the Vaults Festival, which is our kind of like festival here in London for fringe theatre. So hopefully in the coming years, you might get a chance to see this piece of theatre.
Do you type it or handwrite?
So this one I actually typed in.
Okay.
Yeah, not handwritten. My writing, when I'm writing books and I'm writing plays, I use my computer. When I'm doing maths, I never use my computer. That's why all the yellow notepads around the office here, I have to use the non-linear nature of a page.
I have one last thing to ask, or one last concern. And this might be a silly concern, but you were talking about how, finding mathematical breakthroughs and discoveries and proofs are like immortal. They're a chance immortality. That really appeals to me. And you're lucky to be blessed to be one of the people capable of making such breakthroughs. And then I hear you spending about all this time you're spending writing books and plays and giving talks and doing all this outreach, which is really valuable. I feel like you're eating into the hours you have to solve the Riemann hypothesis or make the next big discovery. Like, how do you reconcile your passion for these other things and outreach and that, and the finite number of hours you have to do another great mathematical thing?
Because the great breakthroughs are very often done on the downtime and the time not looking at the problem. And often, I've always used these kind of other activities to help me come back to a problem and see things from a kind of new perspective. So, that was always when I did theatre as a PhD student, it helped me. I got stuck and there was no point sitting at my desk any further. I would just get deeply depressed. I needed to go and do something else. And then when I came back, it was like I was looking at the thing from a new angle. So for me, these things have always been part of the journey of mathematical discovery.
So this is part of your mathematics, is it?
It is.
All right. All right, you can keep doing it then. Look, I reckon you need to check on that sourdough bread.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Well, that's all for today, but if you'd like to see Marcus performing his play, see what you think. It's called I as a Strange Loop, and it's been uploaded to YouTube, where you can watch it for free. In the notes for today's show, I'll also include links to Marcus's books, including the play and a few other bits and pieces. Thanks again to G Research for supporting today's episode, and to Numberphile's longtime supporter, the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute. I'm Brady Harron, and you've been listening to the Numberphile podcast.